Welcome. We're just going to give everyone a moment to settle in. Welcome, everybody. Writers, readers, creators, people of color, colorful people. Welcome to this event, Publishing Experiments for All, a hybrid of a presentation, workshop, and debate. We will collectively discuss what kind of publishing experiments inspire readers to reflect and exchange ideas with each other, and how experiments can be balanced with editorial control to create more space for change within the publishing sector, without losing quality and credibility. As you are well aware, Anya and Andrea are the magnets that have drawn us here tonight. They will be kicking off the evening with a video and a presentation. We will then introduce some participants to share their reflections from the previous 2 workshops we've had here at Frame of Framed. And then we will play. We will play on our playground here for a workshop, and then we will have a little discussion afterwards, have some refreshments, a vote of thanks, and wrap up the evening. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Andrea to kick us off.
Now, here we are. Thank you, Mutalena. At the beginning of our presentation, we'd like to show you a short video made by James Williams. We feel that would be an inspiring way to introduce the context of our research. The video was part of a talk given at the Royal Society of Arts in London in 2017. The video is called "Is Our Attention for Sale?" In that video, Williams talks about the dangers of digital distraction, both for individuals and collectively. Okay, I'll start the video.
And it's more than even... I think there's something very profound and maybe irreversible happening to human attention in the digital age. I think it's more than just distraction. It's more than even just addiction. It could actually be the defining political and moral challenge of our time. I'm going to start with kind of clearing the ground with an observation that Herbert Simon made in the 1970s. When information becomes abundant, attention becomes a scarce resource. This is an observation that I think we're only just starting to understand what it means for human life and society. But this whole environment that has emerged in the last several years to compete for our attention in scientific, systematic ways is often called the attention economy. If you think about the goals that you have for yourself, your life today, this week, this year, there are probably things like, I want to spend more time with family. I want to learn how to play the piano. I want to take that trip I've been thinking about and reflect on my life. These are real human goals. Look at the goals that technology has they're not usually these things. They're things like maximize the amount of time you spend. I think there's something very profound and maybe irreversible happening to human attention in the digital age. I think it's more than just distraction, and it's more than even just addiction. It could actually be the defining political and moral challenge of our time. I want to start with kind of clearing the ground with an observation that Herbert Simon made in the 1970s. When information becomes abundant, attention becomes the scarce resource. This is an observation that I think we're only just starting to understand what it means for human life and society. But this whole environment that has emerged in the last several years to compete for our attention in scientific, systematic ways is often called the attention economy. In addition If you think about the goals that you have for yourself, your life, today, this week, this year, there are probably things like, I want to spend more time with family. I want to learn how to play the piano. I want to take that trip I've been thinking about and reflect on my life. You know, these are real human goals. But if you look at the goals that technologies have for us, they're not usually these things. They're things like maximize the amount of time we spend with them, time on site, or the number of clicks, the number of times we can scroll or tap, the number of page views or ad views, things like this. There's a deep fundamental gap here between, you know, the goals we have and the goals our technologies have for us. And so I think there is this kind of inconvenient truth that we either kind of ignore or maybe don't know about a lot of the time, which is the attention economy, by and large, is not on our side. Its goals are not our goals. We kind of trust these things to be GPSs for our lives, but really they're directing us toward these petty kind of engagement goals. And this is very well known by the people who create them. The CEO of Netflix a little while back said in addition to Snapchat and YouTube, one of their major competitors was sleep. Steve Jobs did not let his children use the iPad, right? So broadly speaking, what's happened in the last couple of decades is our knowledge of psychology, particularly our non-rational biases, kind of these vulnerabilities in our brain, you know, non-rational dynamics of decision-making. We've developed an enormous catalog of these things. And at the same time, this system has emerged on the internet, a system of measurement, message delivery, optimization, experimentation. And these two kind of trends have come into conversation now in the attention economy. What this means now is that this industrial scale persuasion is now the primary business model of our first really major global communications medium. And this isn't widely talked about. You know, we still call companies like Facebook or Twitter social media companies, but they're not selling social media, they're selling our attention. But I think another factor that makes this so urgent, because this power to shape people's attention, to persuade people toward one end or another, is increasingly centralized in the hands of just a few people, a few companies in one state, in one country. It's a weird irony that the whole point of the internet was that it was decentralized in its infrastructure, but then the platforms that have emerged on it have been so centralized. So literally there are people who would probably fit in this room who have their hands on levers that can control the attentional habits of over 2 billion people on planet Earth. What I realized when I was working at Google is looking across the industry at the state of the attention economy and how little it was being talked about in society, and then feeling its effects in my own life, honestly.
So
that, you know,
what
there was
William
more
said
technology around me than ever before, but
if we
it
are
was
seriously
harder somehow
want to
to do what I
protect
wanted to
human
do.
agency
I felt we
and
had made the same
democracy,
mistake that Aldous
it's
Huxley
time
talked
to
about.
start to defend
when he
our
was,
freedom
lamenting
of
that defenders
attention.
of freedom in his own time
This
had failed to
can be
take into
seen
account
as a
man's almost
societal
infinite appetite
context
for distraction.
to our research.
I want to suggest that, you know, if we're at all serious about promoting freedom or autonomy,
I start with a short introduction of our
to look at
project
this
and our
situation
motivation to start
start
it.
taking into account our infinite appetite for
Anya and
distraction.
I are both
think what that
architects,
would entail
researchers
is
and
starting
writers,
to assert and defend
active in the
our
field of
freedom attention.
architecture and design. Anya works on a theoretical and conceptual research. I myself see me more as a journalist. We publish quite a lot, mostly using the format of the essay or the long read. It is a format we feel comfortable with and love, and I think we are not the only ones. The quote of Herbert Simon, you also saw it in the video, was also a starting point of our research. It says, when information becomes abundant, attention becomes the scarce resource. With all the knowledge available at a few clicks, one tends to feel overwhelmed, disengaged, and less informed. Only too often, the aspects of critical reading and engagement are missing. Our research is named Beyond the Essay, New Ways of Critical Reflection. It is the beginning of a research. It's a so-called Staatssubsidie from the Stimuleringsfonds. I now focus on just some aspects of the setup of our research. So, how do we read today? What formats appeal to today's readers? Of course, there are lots of formats that stimulate fast consumption of information. And there are even more formats that want to entertain, steal our attention, and, more or less secretly, want to sell something. But how would a format look like that stimulates reflection and engagement? The central question of our research was, what would it entail to conceptualize and create a new format for critical writing that stimulates reflection and reader engagement? And what would that mean for publishers, writers, and readers? For us, it was important to search for open source and low-cost tool or format. Also, we did not want to create a one-off production, but something that could be used for a longer period and by other writers as well. We will quickly guide you through what we did so far. We studied existing formats. We interviewed publishers to understand their perspectives. We started to explore already available technology. And we conducted 2 workshops together with Frame a Friend. Some of you were attending. I start with the study of examples. So, which other formats beside the long read might be inspiring for readers to engage with? What exists out there? We got inspiration from scientific research, journalism, and art projects. Some of the examples we'd like to share with you. This is the first one. It's called the Dictionary of the Revolution, and it experiments with collectively made documentations. It contains more than 120 texts drawn from interviews with hundreds of people about the shifting meaning of words since the Egyptian revolution in 2011. By clicking on one of the words, the image shows its relationships to other words in the dictionary. And then, again, the text itself appears. This is the second example. It's called Buried Son. It was an inspiring web documentary that combined long reads and voiceover. Unfortunately, the documentary is no longer available. The Biennale it was made for has finished. So, besides very inspiring, it is also an example for what we are not looking for. A one-off production that vanishes after the end of a project or manifestation. This is the third example. It is the project Side Writing, initiated by Jane Randell. It's about academic research. She experiments with combinations of text and spatial thinking. In the Netherlands, we have Klaske Havik at TU Delft, who works, I think, with similar ideas. Oop. Sorry? We will use our mind map to share our thoughts so far with you. We will build up the mind map step by step. In our research, we started with formats and interfaces, aspects that were somehow known to us. We were curious about nonlinear stories and stories that may expand or shrink. That means, as a reader, you do not have to follow the story in a given order, or you can choose what interests you most. The tool we envision may also stimulate interest, imagination, and critical thinking in visual ways. And we hope that a tool like that might stimulate connecting to others and co-creation. understanding publishers' perspective. The aim of this step was to investigate and discuss the needs of publishers, to collect their remarks on methods and tools, and on possible experiments with new forms of publishing. We talked to 5 publishers, well, 3 Dutch, it was Archinet, Archis Volume and Wallis, and 2 international, DPR Barcelona and Talks Edition. Maybe we have to say that it was not a really research, but it were more open conversations. Found some key observations very interesting. Publishers to some extent embrace experimenting with new tools and methods. However, while experimenting, they experience massive setbacks in terms of shortcomings of available technology, lack of in-house knowledge, and financial resources. And we found that publishers mainly draw on assumptions who their readers are. And while talking to publishers, we realized even stronger that publication in itself are spaces for conversation. Anja will continue.
Thank you. My name is Anja. I will take you briefly through the next 3 steps, more or less. After we conducted the interviews with the publishers, we invited a Rotterdam-based collective, Varia, who's focusing on researching the politics of everyday technology, to think along with us what were the possibilities of introducing technology into our research, and asking how could digital technology support critical reflection and reader engagement. Since Varia actually does publish a lot themselves, and they experiment, they build tools, but they also do a lot of publications, we were able to tap into their knowledge and think through this rather abstract question in a bit more of a hands-on matter. So we created together sort of a collective mapping, which was the initial first mind map that created the basis of the mind map that we are trying to guide you through. It's a little bit small on the screen, so we're sorry that you cannot see it very well. This mind map will become a kind of like a guide throughout our research process that we want to share with you. And it's not really a way to illustrate how the publishing system works, but it's more of like a tool for us to think out loud and to ask questions. So also, if you are able to see what's in the mind map and it triggers you to ask a question, please do so. This evening is also meant for that. So what was really important in this series of conversations we had with Varia was to actually understand what stood at the very center of our research. And this was how to interpret publishing as a support system. And this is what you, I hope, can see in the gray circle in the center. The aspects that, in our opinion, stood central to providing such a support system were engagement, collectivity, critical reflection, and accessibility, as well as this point in time, because it does not exist yet, the notion of experiment. So we worked with 3 tools with Varia. I'm not going to get into depth into which tools they were and how we experimented with them. We tried to list them in the presentation, and we're happy to answer that further in questions. And what we did notice with the tools was that while they allowed us to really critically approach the text and to really push us out of certain let's say, patterns that we tend to repeat. They were very conceptually stimulating, and at the same time, they were quite complex to understand, and their accessibility was quite limited. We felt after these workshops, however very inspired, that we would first have to conduct a workshop on how to use such a tool themselves, to then be able to have another workshop to actually creatively engage with it. And that notion of, or tension between accessibility and experiment was something that really intrigued us, because on one hand we felt that the experiment was necessary, but we did not want to conduct an experiment for the sake of experiment itself, that in the end remains locked in a very narrow group of people who can understand the rules of the experiment. So we were really triggered to open that up, and this became the base of our collaboration with Frame of Frames that some of you were part of, and all of you are part of right now, because this is also a continuation of this conversation. We conducted 2 workshops before today. The first one was focusing on the notion of what we call the missing reader, what we understood from the interviews, that actually we knew very little about what readers need, how readers approach a text, and what are also their desires, experiences, and needs. We conducted a really broad selection of experiments. There were 12, so I'm not really able to talk about that in detail. But what we did discover was that a lot of people did experience publishing as some sort of a barrier between the author and themselves. And in a way, the online environment made that boundary somehow less strict. So we felt that there was really like some space to experiment there. We saw that all of the experiments with collective reading were very positively reviewed by the readers, and they really appreciated that it allowed an exchange of ideas. The notion of annotation as a form of conducting conversation, either with the author in an imaginary way or with oneself, came up as something that was very valued. And overall, we saw that reading with a specific prompt in mind actually did allow deep reading. It was not always prompting you to critically read, but it definitely helped people to focus on the text with a specific question. We also discussed a lot the notion of the interface, which I'm not going to discuss now in detail, but perhaps we will come to this. Since we're both writers, it was very important for us to look from that perspective. And in the second workshop, we discussed methods and desires of writers and how to bring their work closer to the audiences. We worked with 3 experiments this time and executed them either individually or collectively. These are easier to name, so we worked with collective writing. We worked with what we aimed at nonlinear writing, but due to, let's say, a limited setup, we could call it a sideline writing, and AI-assisted writing. And in this case, it was really inspiring to see that the ability to interact with the text during these experiments, whether collectively or not, was really creatively stimulating for all of the people participating. And what it allowed the participants to rediscover was the playfulness of writing. And that writing was also a form of a playground. And this form of a playground we would like to reintroduce today. And we were very excited about this playful, multi-versioned approach to publishing. However, we were also very quickly brought back to the ground by the understanding how challenging it is to upkeep and moderate such interactive forms. So we really talked a lot about also simpler ways of creating such publishing spaces. And we hope that exploring these simpler ways or possibilities within that spectrum will come back in the discussion today. But overall, I think what's perhaps known to all of us, but nevertheless really important to stress, we discovered that a sense of community and a safe space are really key to any collective experiment, whether online or not. The clicker isn't working, but this one is. So here we are today with all of you, our frame of frame, at our last step of that part of the research, but also a first step of the follow-up, so to say. And one of the premises based on which we started this project was to eventually create something that would be of value to readers, writers, and publishers. And we would not like to be the ones deciding what is of value. So we would like to invite all of you to that conversation and also to tell us what you think, what is of value to you. And today we will try to focus on bringing these three perspectives together. And we would like to hear your ideas and your feedback on what makes you excited or critical about the things that we mentioned as part of our research, but also what makes you hopeful about future of critical reflection in cultural publishing sector in particular. So it's an invitation for all of you to be a part of the conversation tonight, and also an invitation to be a participant or a collaborator in the follow-up that we create. Please feel free to talk to us and to approach us about it, because while this is the final presentation, it's also just a beginning. So we hope it will make you feel engaged as a part of this project. And with here, I will give the word back to Mutaleni. Thank you.
It's a playground, so it's going to get a little messy. Wonderful, wonderful. I want to know who was here for the first workshop on new ways of reading here at Framer Framed. Yeah, a handful of people. And who was here last week for the second workshop? A couple of drops in the ocean. Tonight we have asked 5 participants from those first 2 workshops to prepare their responses. And not only them, but we open the floor to all of you to ask your questions and share your own reflections. The floor is going to become a very important space, as you will see during our workshop. But I'm first going to just give you all a brief bio on the 5 people we've asked to speak. I will introduce them all at once, and then they will share, and then we will all have a discussion together. I'm going to have to ask you to come up here so that we can also be heard and seen by the friends who are going to be, or who are watching the stream online. So first up, Sepp Eichenhausen is an art researcher and organizer. He works for the Institute of Network Cultures and Platform BK. He will be followed by Fatma Tanis. Fatma is a tutor at the Technische Universiteit Delft and the coordinator of the Jaap Bakema Study Center in Rotterdam. In her doctoral project titled Urban Scenes of a Port City, Exploring Beautiful Izmir Through Narratives of Cosmopolitan Practices, she combined her personal interest in literary writing with her interdisciplinary background to explore Izmir from a cross-cultural perspective. Fatma will be followed by Haitian Ma. Here we go. Haitian comes from a background in comparative literature, translation studies, and digital art preservation. Currently, she's doing practice-based research on the conservation of early net art and how to represent them in exhibition settings, such as this, perhaps. Haitian will be followed by Nick. Nick Axel is an architect, a writer, critic, theorist, and commissioning editor. He's deputy editor of eFlux Architecture and head of the architectural design department at the Gerrit Rietveld Academie here in Amsterdam. And to round it off, We have Martijn de Heer. There he is. Martijn is a designer and developer, local-based, from Amsterdam, focusing on building experimental tools, creating archives, and designing interfaces. His work often revolves around finding new relationships between the physical and the digital. Besides his own practice, he works at the digital rights NGO Bits of Freedom and is a tutor in graphic design at the Royal Academy of Art in The Hague. My name is Mutaleni. I'm a reader, a retired publisher in academia, and I would like to ask Sepp to kick it off, and then he will pass on the mic to Fatma and the rest, and then we'll pass it on to you. So be prepared with your questions, and we'll have an open discussion. Sepp.
Thank you. Nice to be here. It's really exciting for me to discuss this topic with you today because it's what I'm researching on a daily basis at the Institute of Network Cultures. And I was asked to say something in 2 minutes. So I'm going to do something very dangerous, and I put a very simple notion on the table up for discussion. Maybe it's a very elegant or maybe a very dumb notion, but let's see. And I should maybe say this is also something that we came up with together with Anja and with the people from Framer Framed in a research that we're doing, a research work we're doing about hybrid event reports. So what is the future of event reports at cultural spaces? And maybe very briefly, what I should also say is I'm very happy that we do this here in this cultural setting or cultural institution setting, because I speak to a lot of people from the publishing industry who say like this kind of experiment that we're needing, they see that we need this, but there's not really any incentive to do it in the publishing industry. So if we don't do it, it's not going to be done unless maybe Silicon Valley is, doing it for us. So it's really up to us to get dirty and do our experiments together. The notion I want to put on the table is that of the conversation starter. I would propose that we can measure if a publishing experiment is successful if a publication becomes it becomes not the end of a discussion, but a discussion starter. Because everyone I talk to, writers, publishers, also readers, don't want really a publication to be, just disappearing in the void of the internet or a library, but wants it to be open, accessible, multi-voiced, and this is really where it sounds very simple, but this is where it really becomes difficult, right? Because how do you do that in a way that remains in a workload that's doable, but also technically accessible? So for me, these are really the key questions here. Can we do this experiment, and can we bring it back to a really open and accessible way that people can actually engage with this text as a conversation starter, or text, whatever, publication. So yeah, then maybe I should also say something a little bit about the workshop that I was at and what we did. I was here last week. It was the previous workshop in this series. It was for writers, specifically new ways of writing experiments. Anja already said a little bit what was done. I was in the AI-assisted writing group, and I would like to say a few words about it because I imagine that it sparks a lot of discussion. We experimented with OpenAI, which is an AI platform that that anyone can use. I think also the code behind it is open source, even though we didn't really look at it. And it has like it's basically a textbook and has a box, and it has many different functions. And we were just playing around with it, so it can convert one type of code to another, so really for publishers, for coders, but it can also, for instance, create, you give it a prompt of like 2 words, and then writes you a 2-sentence horror story based on those words. And that seemed really fun at first, but then after like 5 times, we figured out that the story becomes repetitive. So this really shows the limitation of AI writing, is that it will never really be creative. So this is something that you really cannot leave up to an AI, but we did find several uses that can actually make it really useful and can make a text more accessible, for instance, in speaking to different publics. So there is one tool that gives you a summary of a text that you give it for a second grader. So this could really help an author to make a text more accessible, or you can use another tool that gives you the tags that you can use to tag your text with. So these are the kind of things that I would like to think more with you about. What are the things that we can do around the writing and analysis process that doesn't really infringe on the depth and the analysis and the quality of the writing, but that actually creates more possibilities for engagement and for an easy production process around that. So these are my experiences and questions for today.
I will try to keep it short as well. I will do my best, and I'm looking at the time. Yeah, in the age of artificial intelligence, I think I'm still interested in the human intelligence. But having said that, I can't deny, of course, the importance of the all tools that we are using and the digital possibilities, of course. So that helped a lot during my PhD process, for which I will try to talk now. About the conversation, having conversation with different audience was central to my writing, my research. I wanted to communicate with my writing to have the impact more perhaps faster at some point, and also having reaching right people to have the right actions in the right time. So that was quite central. For my research, I focused mostly on identifying different groups that I wish to address. And that was based on observation, that I have observed the decision makers, I've observed the citizens, I've observed also a lesser known but quite powerful and impactful group of people. And I try to bring them to fore through writing their narratives, but at the same time I targeted my audience for them to associate themselves with the narratives that I've written, so that they could also relate themselves and start creating their own narratives, producing their own narratives using their creativity and the imagination. So I was not directly aiming to have a conversation one-to-one, but through the writing, maybe without having any conversation, any interaction with them, I wanted them to imagine or recall their memories in those spaces that I've depicted in my research, and come up with their own lived experiences, and hopefully they could join also further discussions that are taking place in the city. So I think that could be my contribution in 3 minutes, and I pass the mic to
Hi. Yeah, so we talk about the human aspect of sort of reading and writing, and also the machine aspect. And I guess what I'm interested in sort of is this space that humans and machines operate in our writing and reading. And I attended both workshops. What I find really interesting is sort of in between these sort of analog material and digital material, which people read and write, they engage with the text differently in a spatial sense. So when we have the physical book, we know how pages scatter physically in space. And then when we move to the digital medium, our participants in the second workshop were saying you have this zoom in, zoom out function at times. And that offers another way of thinking about space and how we allocate the pages in spaces. And then for editors, they would prefer to have these pages scatter out spatially. So then that makes me think about how in a way, digital publishing either can accommodate this sort of conventional way of navigating space, our embodied experiences of reading, or whether they would cultivate another habit of reading in a digital format in terms of how we think about space in a digital setting. And I guess the second aspect, because I come from a preservation background, I was thinking about also the long-term access to, let's say, digital publishing material, because, for example, PDFs will be obsolete at some point, and the texts that we read online, they are very much software-based, which can be obsolete at some point as well. Then how do we ensure the long-term access to these material? Or maybe the future publishing needs to, in a way, embrace ephemerality or embrace loss or embrace illegibility, which is exciting to think about as well. And I guess I will leave it here for now and give the floor to Nick.
Hi, thank you everyone. I'm a bit of an outsider to these events, as but I'm really happy to be here. I'll try and share a couple thoughts, a couple notes for further thinking. If the previous speaker was thinking about kind of the space of writing and the space of reading, I'm maybe more interested here to speak about how the act of publishing compresses space. And brings an enormous amount of material together that then maybe in the act of reading opens that back up. So a number of the things that I've been interested in recently are somewhat more poetic understandings of writing that really questions authorship. There has been a growing scholarship recently on the role that screenshots play in our daily life. We take these all the time, but we do not think of these as really photographs or as documentations. We do not think of using them as in our compositional writing practices. But there are, beyond the scholarship, there are a number of practices in the field of graphic design and art that have begun to work with these. I'm thinking here of the publication F.R. David by Will Holder. And when we really start to bring together these different kind of fragments of material, there also comes to be a question of exactly what are we bringing together and how do we position ourselves as the ones who are gathering things. Anya spoke about annotations and the value of annotations, which I would just like to kind of second, and which maybe we can speak about further later. It's an incredibly meaningful practice of also creating a dialogue and positioning the reader with the original writer, even if they are long dead. But there are also compilation practices that I think are incredibly meaningful for today. I'm thinking of the work of Candace Williams and Cassandra Press. But I think that this also extends much more widely into the proliferation of readers that we see as books. Now, in my professional practice, I commission a lot of writers, but I think that there's an incredible urgency to rethink what has already been written and how that gets composited and delivered. Especially over the past 2 years in response to the George Floyd uprisings in the United States and COVID, there's been a proliferation of new syllabi. And almost, we could think of these things as almost new textbooks, new guides for a future education with material that is already there. So the grounds for future writing, let's say. And then I'd maybe like to end just by kind of sharing a lesson that I once learned from a tutor of mine, Erit Rogoff, who said that the public, that the audience that we might be writing for does not necessarily exist before the publication. Publication is an act of subjectivization. The subject does not always precede it. And so in that, while questions of audiences and who we are writing for are incredibly important, I think it's also important to recognize that those audiences don't necessarily exist yet, but with this publication, we might be able to bring them into being. So, thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello. So I was part of Andrea and Anja's team and conducting these two interviews, or the last two interviews, and I wanted to share kind of two, things that kind of caught my attention having done these workshops. One which is that it was noted that there was a barrier felt between the author and the reader, and the publisher and the reader. And the second is kind of the conversations that we were having during the workshops, the ideas that were being shared, and the things that came up in these workshops. And then looking at, we're thinking about publishing as a support system. Maybe something to question or to think about is how can we devise an environment or create an environment in which there's not just a publisher and an author and a reader is kind of this client who looks at the content and is able to consume it, but the roles are more equal and people have the ability to appropriate content, to make it their own, to cut it up, to chunk it, to mash and mix up, not just by commenting, as was mentioned during the workshops, the comment section is probably dead, but to open it up and to actually have a more equal space, which is in which, everybody is trusted and there's kind of a safe environment, as we did during these workshops.
I have questions. Who has questions? I feel like that was very enriching. It was also very nice to hear the reflections on the first workshop. I was part of the second one, so I recognize some of the discussion points. I'm happy to hear Nick's input as well, with a fresh, clean slate. I feel like some of you made some controversial statements. Seb said AI will never be creative. We talked about audiences. I don't remember hearing once about writing for ourselves. I think we often hear that, those who aren't able to find books that they want to read have to write those books, right? So I feel like we are our first audience. These are just some of my thoughts. I'm curious to hear if you have other questions or some more reflections to add. Anybody? Yes, please. Can you come up? Indeed. If you could just let us know who you are and why you're here.
My name's Amy Spangler, and I co-run a literary agency in Istanbul, Turkey, and I'm here after the Frankfurt Book Fair and have some friends running this and found out about it, so I thought I'd show up. Listening to all this, I didn't bring a pen and paper and I wasn't able to take notes, so I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff. But listening, I think a couple people spoke about community, but I think, okay, this is going to be a little, maybe, random. But one thing that also came to mind is there was, and if this continues, you might want to look into this, Richard Nash, who used to run SoftSkull, started a website called Red Lemonade, maybe 15 years ago. It's now defunct, but his whole idea was that authors would write their, anybody could go and start writing their stuff, and anybody could comment on it, and then they could see the edits, so you could really see the writing in progress. And some published books came out of this, and it was a great idea, and a lot of people got really excited, but it didn't get too far. But it was a great experiment, and I don't know, this was a long time ago. This was, like I said, like 15 years ago, so maybe somebody should try it again. I haven't heard of anybody trying exactly this before. And then also, there would be kind of splinter groups that came off of that from people commenting. So basically, just the communities that formed around that were pretty inspiring, I thought. And I think, working in publishing, and I'm thinking specifically of book publishing, really, I think I've always been waiting for these communities to pop up based on curation. So this was the other word I wanted that kept coming to my mind when I was listening to everyone that I don't think came up. And I'm wondering if you also kind of looked into this as a concept, because I often think about, the difference between a curator and a gatekeeper. in publishing, and what that means, you know, because that is, like Mudaleni was just saying about, you know, writing for ourselves. We have to write for ourselves because there's not the book that we want, but there's also not the book that our community would read out there. So it's also a way to forge your communities to write the book that you and the community, which kind of goes back to, I forget your name, sorry, but the, you know, the subjectivity aspect, right? So the community comes after the book, maybe, just like the subject actually comes after the book. So anyways, this was all very inspiring. So obviously I thought of a few things. I'll just throw those out there. But I think the curation aspect, like the idea of curating, is maybe something else that could be taken up within the framework. Oh, like a curator, yeah. So she's asking if I mean a curator like an editor. I'm thinking more like a publisher or, yeah. Well, who's deciding what? Well, that's the difference. Like, then I asked, what's the difference between a curator and a gatekeeper? Because essentially, these are the people who decide what makes it out into the greater world and to what degree, right? But curator is a much less threatening word and is much tamer. So I don't know if I'm just kind of downplaying the potential violence of being a gatekeeper, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, there are some words that are kind of safe to hide behind, and we are writers and readers, so there's a plethora of words to choose from. But sometimes we do have to, be critical about the way we phrase things. Is there anyone else who would like to add? I mean, we'd really love to hear all your voices. We have an interactive workshop where you can work solo or in smaller groups, but this is really the time to speak, to use our voices. Are there any gatekeepers in the house? I'm interested to hear more from you. You asked the question, and I wondered, are you an editor, a publisher? Could you come up and tell us a bit more about your thoughts about that? No, we can't hear you. You have to be up here for the recording. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for the courage. It's a long walk up here.
It is. I've been working for the Dutch Foundation for Literature for more than 10 years now. I guess we are a sort of gatekeeper. And yeah, I see someone nodding. I do think about that responsibility, and I do try to put it in a direction of which I think we should go. Questions? I find your questions more interesting than my own story. I'm sorry? Yeah, we support digital experiments and try to help developing together with stimuleringsfonds, I guess, new forms of writing, of publishing even, yeah. But I always have the feeling that always keeps being very experimental, and in the startup phase, how do you say that in English, phase, and it never really, like you were telling us about Richard Nash, and that experiment didn't really get somewhere. We always fall back on the good old paper books, and that's the real thing. And so why is that? Why are we already talking for more than a decade about new ways of writing, of reading, of reaching the audience, of et cetera, and next to our bed is still, books are not profitable either. I mean, hardly. Really, print runs are lower than ever, and it's not just the money. I think is my point, but I don't know. What do you think?
In this, I'm an art critic, and I wrote for magazines for a long time. Then I didn't earn enough money, and I curated a lot of exhibitions. Because of my age, I decided, well, I'm not going to run anymore. I'm going to go a little bit slower. And then I started my own blog, and I had some small successes with that, just in the circle of people I knew. And I wrote about exhibitions and would send the articles to the people who exhibited. And so you have your own public in a way. And well, pretty recently I also published a book of my own, and that's not a big success, but it's a start, because I'm thinking about a series, and well, I'm not saying that's a big commercial success, but it works within all these limits of publishing on the internet, doing it yourself, having contact with people. But it's me and time, especially time, what is doing it. And I loved having my blog, because the National Library has a project where it takes on blogs, so it took on the blog as being something historical worthwhile for them. So it's been preserved for partly. Well, so and so on. And it's the combination. That's what I wanted to say.
Anybody else want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to...
Oh, are you leaving, Mireille? No.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I just want to briefly reflect on the notion of, let's say, the durability of the experiment and the gatekeeping and responsibility aspect. Because I have the feeling there are a lot of experiments going on, but a lot of them are very short-lived. Because I think that that's my interpretation, that there's no sense of, I don't know, creating something that, well, technology is changing very fast. So somebody has to take responsibility of upkeeping that experiment or developing it so that it can evolve together with the technology and the communities or audiences that it serves. And this is where the real challenge comes. And I have the feeling that often this responsibility falls back on the artist or the author. So maybe this is, I don't really have an answer to that question, but I have the feeling that maybe this is also something that we have to think about, where that responsibility perhaps should lie, and maybe also where the funding should go, because there's a lot of funding going to one-off experiments that are beautiful and inspiring for a moment. But what would happen if the funding would go to maintenance? That's something that I think about.
No, I mean, I want to reflect on this. I mean, I don't mean to sound like, I don't know, the man or whatever, but a lot of experiments don't have business plans, right? They're just experiments, and they don't, I mean, they don't, I mean, to maintain themselves, they need to generate resources, they need to, you know, pay the people who are working for them. And, you know, like, the arts is one of the biggest trickle-up economies or industries in the world, right? I mean, Platform BK, you know, teaches this, right? But I don't know. Also, I think, you know, when we're speaking about like gatekeeping and curating, a lot of, I think, what we're talking about is a question of infrastructure, right? And the question of access to infrastructure. And you know, the internet has really dissolved a lot of barriers to access, not necessarily to infrastructure, but to at least publishing, right? I mean, we can all publish, like a tweet is publishing in a way. But you know, like there are, and you know, the question of community came up, and I think that there's a funny parallel between infrastructure and community, because at a certain point, community can become infrastructure for a publication, and vice versa. And like in the case of this blog that you're saying. But yeah, I mean, also infrastructure has power. And, you know, on the one hand, you know, we can look at the type of power that, you know, the biggest publishers in the world have, newspapers. But we can also, you know, I think really, you know, we should also, I think, understand what we're doing when we're writing, is that every word has the potential to change the world in a way. I mean, regardless of whether it has access to this kind of very, you know, well-developed and very costly to maintain infrastructure or not. I think the infrastructure in the end developed around the printed word, again, whether it's physical or digital, but because of the power the word has, not the other way around. Right?
To me, it's very important this time, building this community, building a name, because internet now has this very ambivalent way of building names, doing it quickly, short, and so you need some structure, not only infrastructure, but you need the time to build something. It's not only about maintenance, to build your public, to build the infrastructure together. And I think time is one of the most important questions about internet anyway. It's also because it has this archival function at the one hand, and it has this shorthand attention at the other hand. And these two are really the two, feeble factors together, which making it very difficult for an individual to come in. When you're not a consumer, it's difficult to come in. If you're a consumer, it's okay, then you'll just find your interesting things and you go away again.
But even as a consumer, as a reader,
yes, okay,
it's difficult because...
I'm not sure it's about reading anymore if you talk about the internet.
And this is exactly what the video was reflecting on, our scarce attention. And I think with the multitude of places you can read on the internet and you know, the many times you have to blink and sleep in between all the other things you have to do and read, there are only so many places you can go in the digital reading landscape. So I think attention is perhaps a big, how do I say, like a big problem. It's not, I mean, if you're talking about the lack of online digital publishing platforms having success, it's because there's so many of them. Yeah, where do you get the critical mass? Newspapers, yes. And maybe that's an area where the print transition to digital has been most successful and where the power lies in terms of infrastructure and audience. But in terms of the creative word, the academic essay, these are still challenges for us to explore and figure out. I saw some chatter at the back.
Keep it short. That is already my cue. Great. Hi.
Take your time.
My name is Remke van Bladel. So I'm an art book maker, a bookmaker, and I also make a lot of publishing platforms. And I think this addition of space, I think the infrastructure, they're key and they're so interesting. But I, in the past decade, also kind of generated a lot of platforms where this sense of infrastructure is exactly the thing where it kind of, I think you hit it directly there, Anja, is that they're project-based. They live in this moment, and actually, so far, the only real way of archiving a web platform has been to make a book out of it. And I did this for eFlux, for the super community, for Verso, also with the Guangzhou Biennale last year. Is that all these, you spend so much time, energy, resources, human labor, material, like weeks and months of writing. But then in order to keep this up in the air for 15 years, you better just print a book and just put it on the shelf, and that comes back to space. You know, this little thing, you don't need servers to run everywhere, you just place it on your shelf. What am I saying with all of this? I think it just taps into something that I wanted to share, kind of, because it taps into so many aspects of all the interesting things that are being kind of shared across here. Is that short enough?
Anybody else want to add something?
I'm curious if Haitian is satisfied with that. You had the question of sort of the long-term aspect of publishing, how do we ensure long-term access? You are perhaps an analog girl in a digital world. Is this satisfactory to you that the printed book is the answer?
Yeah, I wonder, it makes me think about this idea of power again and the power of the internet, and maybe what it does invite us also to experiment with is this idea of ephemerality, and if we can think about, sort of embrace loss in that sense, or embrace that these things wouldn't function, and then publish with that mindset already in place. And I feel that might cultivate another way of thinking about reading and what it is that, with this new technology emerging, because I was also thinking about when the book was invented, when the printed book was invented, people also take a long time to adjust to mode of reading the book. And it's because internet, we're also taking time to learning about new ways of reading on the internet. And is it cultivating an ephemeral way of reading, an ephemeral way of archiving? So yeah, I am not sure. I feel it can be exciting as well, and whether we want to accept it, and what does it say about heritage and knowledge? I guess those are interesting questions to pose.
Yeah, it makes me go back to the initial question, reading experiments for all. Who's the all, right? Is this a universal all, everyone, everywhere, all the time, forever? Or is that this, like, as many people as we can reach, possibly? And then I think the question is not so much should we go back to the print book or stay to digital, but how can a publication be both at the same time? Right? How can we hybridize our publishing practices? Because at the Institute of Network Cultures, we publish hybrid books. So we have digital versions and we have print versions. And we send our print versions to anyone who orders it online for free, anywhere around the world. So this is supposedly global access, but reality teaches us that some places don't actually get the books. It's impossible to receive them. Whereas other places, it's maybe impossible to have the stable internet connection to download a book. So I guess if we're talking about experiments that should serve as many people as we want, and we think about, let's say, global access, we should think about hybrid books, so print and digital.
But just kind of to that point, I mean, the experience I've had in kind of like magazine publishing has really placed a lot of emphasis, or made me realize the importance of distribution. And you know, we can even think of the internet in this way, right? You know, where like how we actually access something, how we discover something, how something comes to us. But you know, in publishing, in like physical publishing, right, distribution is like 75% of all costs. But you know, the thing about books, and they're durable, but they can also be smuggled, right? So the infrastructure that Inc. is working with is the postal service, but there are other ways of bringing physical copies to places, right? And we can think of you know, the incredible archives of material that have been smuggled out of areas, you know, parts of the world undergoing intense censorship and state control. There's also, I think, you know, and this is literally, you know, this infrastructure of distribution and of publishing. It's literally people, you know, taking a backpack and bringing it to another person and taking that backpack. But yeah, I don't know. It's I just wanted to kind of bring this, because I think, you know, the constellation of terms that's being brought here of reader, writer, and publisher. There are a few other terms that that intersect with some of these, like editor and distributor and these things. And I think it's a really kind of fascinating discussion when we really kind of start mapping out the terrain between these three terms.
That's a nice segue, I think. Thanks, Nick. We are going to continue this discussion, but in a workshop format. And perhaps we can get the questions up on the board. Regarding the writer, the reader, and the publisher, we have 3 piles of papers, pink, yellow, and blue. And we're inviting you to scribble, draw, and write, and answer these 3 questions. If you're going to answer from the perspective of a writer, if you could pick a blue piece of paper, from the perspective of a reader, a yellow piece of paper, and from the perspective of a publisher, a pink piece of paper. And the questions you'll see up there are: which existing publishing platforms or technologies break the boundaries of publishing? A few of you have mentioned some that I think you feel do that. If you could write them down on the pink paper. Or what excites you about the future of digital publishing and the direction it's going in? And lastly, can you imagine an experimental form of publishing that could support critical reflection? And here, you know, impossible is nothing. So whether it's AI or, you know, your cat, whoever, whatever, however, would be curious to hear. So this is the point where we can all get up, stretch, chat, work in teams, groups, or on our own. And then what we'll do is we'll use the floor and we will place the papers down, and these responses will inform the mind map that Anya and Andrea are working on as a product of their research. Thanks for the discussion. Dear friends, before we continue, this is just a general invite to maybe go to the bar, grab some water, order a drink, and then we congregate in the belly of the playground. Okay, so most of us are gathered in the playground. Are all the pink, blue, and yellow crayons on the ground? We can go question by question, perhaps, and there's some beautiful calligraphy here, and some other writing that's easier to read. If you notice or you know that you've responded to one of these questions or you see a response, please let's pick it up and read it out loud to each other, and then replace it on the ground in a new pattern together. Okay, so which existing publishing platforms or technologies break the boundaries of publishing? That was question number 1, and in the center there is a spiral.
Oh yeah, I had to pick it up, huh? Yeah, okay. Yeah, the knees are still working. That part is working. The brain. Yeah, I was just thinking about things like they're probably actually not so far off, and maybe I don't think that they're groundbreaking, maybe that sense. But I like how Medium works, and I like how GitHub also is being used for actually kind of as a publishing platform. Um, I worked with, but I really enjoy the multivocality of eFlux and what they're trying to do in a lot of different ways. So that's where those three actually came from. I also like the fact that, especially with Medium and GitHub, that there is the more community aspect around it, the prosumer kind of way of being a writer and publisher at the same time, publishing code, publishing things around code in both of those cases. So I find that interesting about these existing platforms. Medium. I will let Faith decide.
Okay, very cliche. but I would say Twitter for news media. Dare say that every self-respecting journalist is a professional Twitter lurker. One does not go to CNN or BBC for breaking news. For celebrity news or tabloid, it's Instagram and now TikTok. Any other breakthroughs? Existing platforms or technologies that break the boundaries?
So I just remembered a website from my student years, which was upload something to download something. So you could only retrieve content if you added something to your own. So I thought it was sometimes not the best content, but it was interesting for sure.
I'm not sure if it was meant as an answer to the first question, but it seems like this. Writing on walls and spaces, graffiti, new interpretations when the text and code become distorted. Yeah.
Sort of, I was thinking about what we talked about hybridized publication and how we can merge virtual spaces with physical spaces and merge digital publishing with curation and with architecture and with spaces that will go, let's say, fall into ruins in a way and live with that in the publishing practice. But not really a platform, I guess.
I really like Graph Commons lately, that it's more to publish, let's say, as a graph things. And although I hate the company behind it, like I hate Facebook and Meta, I think like Instagram is a great platform for publishing nevertheless. And also I read a lot of good stuff on Twitter as well. So I think that the ethics of these platforms is one thing, the tech knowledge they develop is another thing, but actually the community they enable is also a third thing that I find it really something to think about, yeah. And I also like Medium, but and I really love to order books at the Institute of Network Cultures, and for that reason I never read them online actually. So I think that's great. Also because I think it makes really a great balance between publishing on demand and making it available online as well.
I see number one, something about audio publications.
Well, we didn't actually talk at all about multisensory publications today. And then Lara said immediately, well, that's breaking the boundaries quite literally. And that's maybe why we prefer a book over some e-reader, because you have the physicality of the paper and the smell of the library. So this is a direction to think in. Then we thought about print-on-demand networks and the commenting plugin Hypothesis, which I also really love. Hypothesis is a plugin that you can install on Firefox, I think, and it creates a kind of overlay on any kind of website. On Chrome, sorry. Yeah. And you can comment on anything on that website. So you can highlight something and then comment on it, and anyone who has that same plugin can see your comments and comment to it and comment themselves. So it creates, it revives the comment section, but in the text. No, but you don't see it on the normal website. It works on any website. So I mean, it's not troll proof, right? But if you have your own website and you have a community and you don't tell anyone about it, no one's gonna find out until they do. I mean, yeah, you can go to the MoMA website and hypothesize it. I don't know, something like that. Yeah.
I see existing publishing. WhatsApp. Who wants to talk about WhatsApp? Yes.
I just have a very free interpretation of a publishing platform. So I think that WhatsApp group chat is a way to penetrate the very personal circle of somebody. So a very specific targeted group.
Thank you. I think I had something a little absurd. Or not so absurd. I saw something, but now I'm confused. So many things going on. TikTok.
Well, this was the paper of writers. Obviously, I'm not a writer. I'm a student, but I think like I write my diary, and maybe that counts. I think that it could be like really interesting the idea that TikTok now is really famous, and the main idea that you have to express a big idea in 15 seconds. You have to know how to important, like how to take the focus on the main subject to attract like the people, and also maybe like the amount of information that can be prioritized or not in that 50 seconds. So I think it's kind of interesting, like how the people choose the main point and how you can make the people feel attracted to your video.
But there are always going to be newer technologies, and yeah, every 5-10 years we're going to feel older and older because we can't catch up, we can't keep up, and it'll be second nature to some. I wrote something that I mean, it's not a technology, but I thought to trick the gatekeepers, many female writers still use pen names or initials to conceal gender. And in the workshop last week, someone talked about a digital avatar as an author, using an alter ego to write more freely or uninhibited, unpoliced, uncensored.
Yeah, I was researching on this sort of early net art piece. It's called Narazoid by this Dutch visual artist called Yvonne Legrand. And she basically invented this avatar called Narazoid and had one story published every week or every month, and have readers interact with her through email exchanges. And then she filtered these emails and then feed them back to the stories, not in the tone of Yvonne Legrand, but in the tone of Narazoid. So then you have this sort of digital avatar acting as an editor, organizing people's stories, but then bringing them together in a collective but anonymous form, as a way of sort of collective writing and collective publishing. And I thought that sort of early prototype was very interesting and maybe continue to play out nowadays on the internet.
Like, is that the idea? So the creative subject in this case is actually an amalgam of all these other subjects, but all writing as if they were that subject?
The people who responded to Narazoid wrote in their own voice.
In their own voice,
But
okay.
then Narazoid would then turn these into her encounters with these people. So then it's all fictional, but then when people responded, maybe they responded with, say, real stories, but then it's filtered through this virtual persona.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, well, since I have the microphone, I'll just tell you that I put Wattpad in Substack. And then I wrote a bunch of stuff about it. So, because no, I don't want to read it. But well, no, I didn't write much. Actually, number one just says, yeah, Wattpad proletarialization, and then Substack direct access, no gatekeeper, easy to support financially. And I would say, actually, I mean, something like Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. I think it's very. What's great is that we now have these ways where we can support the stuff we want to read, or support the people who are producing stuff that we want to read or listen to or whatnot. So directly, yeah. And with Wattpad, I mean, you know, the book publishing industry likes to crap all over Wattpad, frankly, but it's, you know, it really is a proletarization of publishing, and it's quite, for book publishing, it's quite radical, I think, and still has a lot of potential. Yeah.
Also commented on TikTok, like my friend said, and then on Wattpad, but I also wrote like the negative aspects. I used to be a quite fan of Wattpad when I was younger, because I believe it has like a lot of opportunities. You can read about a lot of topics, but sometimes the quality is not good. That's what happens when you like give the freedom to everyone write whatever they want. And sometimes it's also like it got very popular with fan fiction. I think that fanfics is something that you don't usually find on paper published books, and this is why Wattpad was a huge opportunity for that market and for that target. But yeah, I also wrote like the content that they publish is hardly reviewed, and it's like the authors do not get rewarded for their work only when it's paper published, so it's kind of bad for digital publication. And I also wrote Goodreads. I don't know if you've heard of that platform, but it creates like it's a space for readers. I think that's really cool. Like it's made by readers and for readers. They can give their opinions on books. They can also have challenges with their friends. So I think it's like a really cool platform. That one I like it. But I have to say the interface it's too old. It really needs to adapt to the moment.
I would like to comment on some of the things that were said about Wattpad and Substack. It's interesting to see that if you look at the history of publishing and even digital publishing, before Substack you had Medium, and before Medium you had Blogger. So every time like these platforms come and go, like another version of them pops up. But I think, and before Wattpad you had like these various fanfic websites. It was not concentrated in one place, because 50 Shades of Grey is a fan fiction of Twilight, or is it the other way around? I don't remember. Yeah. So, yeah. So interesting, and also even you have after though this whole like YA extremely in terms of storytelling it's terrible, but it's like 4-part blockbuster movie, which was also a Wattpad story. Yeah. Yeah. But so what thing is what happens like the moment these kinds of democratized platforms come up, the big tech or the big publishing, they just swoop in, put money, and then it becomes another, how do you say it, commercialized thing, and it starts getting filtered. That's the thing that really annoys me, because the moment gatekeepers like editors find out that okay, something is interesting on Wattpad, becomes a book. So the gatekeeping just comes in and it just keeps reproducing itself, which is kind of. And the same with, I mean, Goodreads is Amazon has taken it over. I think it's owned by Amazon. Publishers hate Amazon, except maybe me.
Fan fiction broke through traditional gatekeepers of publishing. Was that someone else? Yeah. Okay.
It's actually what Ebba said just explained, what I wrote down. No, really, really, it's exactly my point. Yeah.
Another contribution here for existing or maybe experimental publishing. This is my contribution. Unedited books written by and for children. To encourage reading and writing freely. And they always say when you read to children, don't correct them all the time. Let them just read. Just listen to them and let them just read. But of course, we're always correcting them. So how wonderful would it be if, and I also said self-publishing, of course, I'm not speaking commercially, but, you know, making books, knutselen, crafting. Yeah.
mean, my experience as a writer has actually been that a lot of publications are unedited, and that there that there is not actually someone working on the text and kind of in dialogue with the author. I mean, I always say that I became an editor because as a writer I was looking for one, and I never found one throughout architectural publishing. It was really rough. But what I wonder is, like, you know, also speaking about how like Wattpad is bad or has bad writing on it. I mean, that to me is a really important thing to realize, that like when you're reading something and it's like, oh no, this is bad, or like, oh, this doesn't make sense, or oh, this could be done better. Like that to me is really important critical reflection that is taking place like in and about the text itself. And I wonder, and so I saw this kind of proposal. I didn't know that these were two separate things, that it was unedited books and then written by and for children. But yeah, I mean, unedited books, they're very confrontational, right? But maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
There are there are printed books, prized, highly critically acclaimed books that break the conventional boundaries of edited text or storytelling. So yeah, it's a thin line. I get it. I mean, but I'm saying the experimentation has a place. You know, there are authors who don't use punctuation, or who you have no idea where you are, and thank God nobody messed with that creative narrative, because then the journey is just the more awesome for it. So I'm just saying that I think there is a place to play. But I hear you. But I'm saying that I think, you know, we're not all seeking that sort of perfect version.
Is there anyone here who makes their living by writing? As their main profession? No, because I would like to hear from them about the crowdfunding part of it, because I'm very excited by it, but I'm also very critical of it, because that's one more task you put on the plate of the writer, right? And then it's their responsibility if they can't make a living. So I think we have to think through this kind of thing very critically before we say it, because then it also becomes the responsibility of the market, and there's no appeal to public function of it.
Yeah, that's also why I never really, I engaged with it once. I crowdfunded, not for a piece of writing, but for an exhibition, which was also a research and a piece of writing in a way in one. And it was a terrible experience.
Did your parents pay?
Also, yes, but it was also it was just a terrible experience, and it was a fantastic exhibition, but it then cost me like 3 years of my life to kind of get out of the mess that I got myself into. I would never recommend, and it's also why I never engaged with crowdfunding again, because it's indeed a really heavy weight that you need to carry as a creator to still, sell your work before it's even there.
That positive note. Maybe we move on to the second question. What excites you about the future of publishing and the direction it's going in? And someone asked me, but what is the direction that publishing is going in? I said, the direction that excites you. So who answered that question and is willing to...
Shall I read it to you? Because I hope that other people think differently and have better ideas than I have of publishing. Okay, here I go. It's really terrible. All experiments with group writing and broader participations are doomed. So much for my trust in the endless possibilities of alternative forms of publishing. But please convince me.
I said the democratization or aspect, or rather the level playing field that digital platforms have created, especially for marginalized people and communities, is something that I'm still excited about. Yes, of course, there's a dark side to it, but there was also a dark side to publishing books. Paper books still is. But I do feel that it's threatened by big tech, like what Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter, which is like really scary. So that's the downside. But I do think that having access to online communities has kind of leveled the playing field a little bit for people from the global south, marginalized communities in the global north. So that's something I'm still excited about. And I'm not usually a very optimistic person.
Someone else wrote about transnational readers, exchange, I don't understand. So someone has to explain. Transnational readers, perspectives, no?
Build up on that, and I wasn't sure which question I'm answering with this, but I am really excited about this notion about books as multi-generational conversations spaces that they always were, like this possibility of imagining about engaging in a conversation with somebody who lived in a completely different time period and had a completely different experience than you. I always found fascinating. And I think it becomes especially relevant in, I think it's been always relevant, but like every generation has their own contested story. But I think it's somewhat an important role that the publishing world plays in allowing to contest the stories that we are confronting now, such as racism, colonialism, climate crisis, etc. You know, like I can name them all. But it makes me really excited that, you know, like we could really embrace that space also with technology to make it more visible, or to make that to make those stories or these conversations more lively. It's I really see a lot of potential there, and I'm not sure how, but it I find it a really I don't know, like a hopeful place.
Someone said something about hyperlinks.
It's been really interesting to see how like these communities that have kind of generated around Twitter and around other kind of, you know, so-called social media have in a certain way changed narratives in this way. I'm thinking there's a number of books or a number of exhibitions that have happened where the response from the response from the Twitter community has completely changed the way that these things are understood, or that someone's career is understood. And I think that, yeah, just by giving a voice to people, it also allows these conversations and these reflections to happen. And it's really, it's uncontrollable, right, when you do it. But I think it's really important.
Believe it or not, we're running out of time. Any burning itches that need to be scratched? I think we have plenty to chew on, and that this crowdsourcing of excitement, experiments, disasters and nightmares will enrich the research further. We would like to just have a seat again, ask you to have a seat, and have Andrea and Anya wrap up the evening with a vote of thanks before we all head into the dark.
We can just sit here. I mean, we can also, yeah. Let me get my piece of paper. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much. It was, yeah, for me, incredibly inspiring conversation. I wish we could have these conversations more often. I think we are really positively surprised how this topic kind of unknowingly brought a really diverse group of people together who are connected to publishing either professionally or not. But it really opened up our perspective on what we've been doing with this project. We started by exploring the publishing world just by asking publishers what they do and what they and what they would like to do and why not. But we feel that conversation in this format feels a lot more relevant in a way, and we would like to continue it. We will develop our project further. We are not sure yet how, because we have to indeed chew on all of this. But we do hope to stay in touch, and that if you would like to, that you could be a part of this conversation still. And yeah, I don't know if maybe anyone has any closing remarks or observations that you would like to share. That's also possible. Is there a second mic or?
Yeah, Anja and Andrea, thank you so much for this. I'm of course eager to kind of know what will be done with the outcomes of this, and are there any plans of kind of how this information is going to kind of be disseminated or? Yeah, exactly. We might even see if we can build a tool for this. Exactly. Yeah. No, it would be great, and I think that taps into a little bit of that that I'm in my role here together also with Marianne, is that we're developing also this tool here for Framer Framed, and I think that these are very yeah, super nice also insights that we get out of this, and that's why I'm also very interested to kind of see how this will kind of continue. But also, it's kind of like an open call also to this audience that once we are a little bit further down the line, then it would also be great to kind of get your feedback and some critical reflections on the thing that we're trying to do, and to see to break it to pieces, to tear it apart, to see what's missing or what we could do and to improve it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we will definitely gather all of these experiences somehow together. I think preliminarily it will have some shape of a report of sorts that will be more, let's say, a compilation of the information. That doesn't satisfy me, let's say, as a format. But I think this is a place to start. We will for sure also publish an article to reflect on it. But then the next step for us is how to take conclusions and how to shape a follow-up project. I think we have also something in between with Framer Framed. So we will also discuss how we can maybe weave that into this discussion. But yeah, we will for sure share it with you as soon as it's there. And now we also hope that for the follow-up of the project, we also would like to do it with partners. So it's not, like this exploration was mostly by the two of us and with Varia and with Martijn. But we hope that the follow-up project will have a more collective shape. I think there's no way to do it differently. Is there anybody else?
If you would have to give a hunch of what direction you're most inspired to take it, which one is it at?
Yeah, I would say that there was a lot of the notions about collective writing in a way, or like exploring this this play for dimension, where or this like polyvocal multi-version aspect were quite interesting and seemed quite promising, but we heard that it's doomed. So I'll have to think about that. And somehow, I don't know why, but we did, in our early discussions, we thought we're not going to go in the direction of the distribution, even though we know there's a lot to be there. Maybe it's something we have to rethink. So that's really food for thought that came out of this meeting. That at least for me made me question again if this was like a good initial decision. Yes. So I have a list of thank yous. Please bear with me. It's not very long. I would like to thank, in non-particular order, Joanna Schikau and Niels Schrader and Saskia Pauls for a lot of tips and help that we got at the start. Stefan Peterman, Nathan Jones, Marina van den Bergen, Pia Paul, Ethel Barana Paul, Cesar Reyes for their generosity in the interviews. Manetta Berends and Christina Kohar for inspiring workshops. Martijn de Heer for great design and collaboration. Frame of Framed, and especially Yosine, Ebise, Zhang, Jack, Evie, and Lydia for support and organization. Stimuleringsfonds for funding. All our speakers today, and we have a little gift for you. So thank you, Fatma. And thank you, Martijn. Thank you, Nick. And Seb. And Haitian. I just make her walk around. And of course, Teleni for great moderation. And thank you all of the participants. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts and for bearing with us. And yeah, let's hope to be continued. Now we can continue.